They said Africa was nothing but famine, war, and despair. Yet, in a landlocked strip of soil called Burkina Faso, one of the poorest nations on earth, gold runs through the veins of the earth, and courage beats in the heart of its people. How can a country ranked among the world's top 13 producers of gold still remain among the 8 poorest? This contradiction is no accident. It is the shadow of exploitation that has lasted for more than a century. Out of this shadow rose a young soldier, not a general, but a captain. Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and declared that their future would no longer be written in Paris, Washington, or Brussels. At just 34, he promised to continue the unfinished vision of Thomas Sankara, a vision of sovereignty, dignity, and true independence. This is not merely a coup. It is a question to the world. Can one small, battered nation light the path for an entire continent? Do not look away. What comes next may reshape the map of Africa. Subscribe and keep walking with us. The story of Ibrahim Traoré cannot be understood without first walking the broken road of Burkina Faso. Once known as Upper Volta, this land was carved into the map by French colonial rule in the 19th century. Its soil was rich with gold, cotton, uranium, and rare minerals, yet the people were left poor, illiterate, and dependent. France extracted wealth while leaving behind neither strong industry nor lasting infrastructure. By the time independence was declared in 1960, it was little more than a flag without true sovereignty. The decades that followed were a carousel of coups. In 1966, protests toppled the first president Maurice Yameogo. In 1980, a colonel seized power. 2 years later, another officer pushed him aside. The pattern repeated. Generals rising, falling, each promising change, each leaving the people disillusioned. France, secure in its contracts, and its troops stationed in Ouagadougou, did not care who ruled as long as the resources flowed westward. Then came a spark. In 1983, a fiery young officer named Thomas Sankara rose to power. He renamed the nation from its colonial identity, Upper Volta, to Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. He banned forced marriages, expanded literacy, launched vaccination drives, and demanded food self-sufficiency. Ministers drove cheap Renaults instead of Mercedes. He declared foreign aid a trap and warned Africa not to bow to the International Monetary Fund. Sankara's defiance of neocolonialism inspired millions, but also angered Paris. In October 1987, he was assassinated, and Blaise Compaoré reversed his reforms. For 27 years, Compaoré ruled as a dictator, tied hand and foot to France and the West. By 2014, the people had had enough. When Compaoré tried to extend his rule, the streets erupted, parliament burned, government buildings fell, and the dictator fled into exile. Yet the liberation was short-lived. Terrorism, fueled by the chaos after Gaddafi's fall in Libya in 2011, spilled across the Sahel. By 2015, jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda affiliates and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara carved out territory across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Villages were raided, schools closed, farmers displaced. Between 2015 and 2021, more than 10,000 people were killed, and nearly 2 million driven from their homes. 40% of the country's territory slipped from state control. The irony was cruel. Western forces, French, American, had established counterterrorism bases in the region. But instead of defeating jihadists, they seemed to watch as the threat spread. For young soldiers on the front lines, under-equipped and outgunned, it felt like betrayal. They risked their lives daily, while their leaders sipped cocktails with foreign advisors. The anger in the barracks grew heavier than the rifles they carried. On 30th September 2022, the storm broke. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 34 years old, stepped onto the national stage. With fellow officers, he overthrew the faltering leadership and declared a new beginning. Appearing on television in military fatigues, he promised not personal wealth or rank, but a restoration of dignity. He refused to promote himself to general. He declined the presidential salary. "I am a soldier of the people," he told his nation, "not a ruler above them." His message was simple but electrifying. Burkina Faso would not remain a slave forever. It would fight, and from that day, the Sahel had a new name echoing across its red soil: Traoré. But if history has taught us one thing, it is this: every beacon that dares to shine in the Sahel attracts storms. The months that followed Traoré's rise were a whirlwind that shook not only Burkina Faso, but the entire region. What began as a coup became a campaign of defiance against powers that had dominated West Africa for over a century. The first strike was symbolic yet seismic. French troops, long entrenched under the banner of counterterrorism, were ordered to leave. Their bases, which had operated for decades, were no longer welcome. Soon after, the French ambassador himself was expelled, an unmistakable gesture that Burkina Faso would no longer accept foreign tutelage. To seal the break, French-backed media outlets were banned, accused of spreading propaganda to undermine national sovereignty. Traoré's actions reverberated like thunder across Africa. Crowds filled Ouagadougou's streets waving national flags, chanting slogans of freedom, invoking the spirit of Sankara. For many, it felt like history had come full circle. Another young officer daring to dream of independence beyond mere paper. The atmosphere was charged with both hope and danger. But defiance without substance can collapse quickly. Traoré knew this, and so he turned to the heart of the nation's wealth: gold. In 2023, he approved Burkina Faso's first state-run gold refinery. For decades, raw gold had been exported unprocessed, enriching foreign corporations while leaving locals with crumbs. Now, for the first time, gold would be refined at home, jobs would be created, and value would remain in the land. In 2024, he went further, suspending all export permits for gold to prevent the outflow of wealth through shadowy deals. To the West, this was not just defiance, it was sacrilege. The system of extraction that had quietly enriched empires for decades was being dismantled before their eyes. At the same time, Traoré launched an anti-corruption campaign that cut into the privileges of ministers and bureaucrats. Lavish perks, luxury cars, and endless allowances were stripped away. The message was clear: leadership was a duty, not a feast. Security was the other pillar. Knowing that conventional forces were stretched thin, Traoré initiated the recruitment of civilian volunteers. Thousands joined, trained alongside the army, and became a local shield against jihadist incursions. It was not just about military strength. It was about dignity. Villagers who had once fled were now standing to defend their soil. The response from the West was swift in rhetoric, but hesitant in action. Paris condemned the expulsions. Washington warned of instability. European Union officials raised concerns over democracy and human rights. But behind the diplomatic words lay a deeper fear that if Burkina Faso could chart its own path, others might follow. Elsewhere, the moves were welcomed. In Bamako and Niamey, the capitals of Mali and Niger, leaders saw a brother in arms. Together they forged the alliance of Sahel states, pledging mutual defense, resource control, and sovereignty. In Moscow, Traoré found open arms. Russia provided weapons and military cooperation, eager to fill the vacuum left by France. In Beijing, doors opened for infrastructure and mining deals. A multipolar future was taking shape in real time. To the people of Burkina Faso, Traoré's stance was more than politics. It was pride restored. He walked the streets in the same captain's rank, calling himself a soldier of the people. He refused to cloak himself in luxury, and in this humility they saw authenticity. Markets buzzed with his name. Murals of Sankara and Traoré appeared side by side, and songs praised the captain who defied empires. But shadows lengthened. Reports surfaced of multiple assassination attempts, convoys ambushed, bodyguards bribed with millions of euros. Intelligence plots whispered in the dark. Up to 18 attempts were said to have failed, each one reminding the nation that their leader was a marked man. Yet each survival only deepened his legend. The captain who would not bow, the flame that refused to be extinguished. The atmosphere in Ouagadougou was electric. Some called it the rebirth of Sankara's dream. Others feared a storm gathering that could consume the nation. In every cafe, in every market stall, the same question lingered. Could Burkina Faso truly defy the weight of history? But was this defiance enough to break the chains of a century-old system? Every revolution carries with it both light and shadow. For Burkina Faso, the ascent of Captain Ibrahim Traoré was not just a reshuffling of elites. It was a gamble with the nation's survival. The consequences were immediate and profound, touching every layer of civilian and political life. In the short term, there was a surge of pride. After years of humiliation, people felt ownership of their soil once again. The expulsion of French troops was celebrated as the end of a colonial chapter that had lasted generations. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, eager to take up arms to defend their villages. Markets echoed with chants. Classrooms buzzed with new songs of hope, and children drew flags not of France, but of their homeland. For a moment, unity returned to a land long fractured by fear, but reality was never far behind. Terrorist groups still prowled the northern deserts and eastern villages. Their attacks did not stop simply because a new captain took power. Families continued to flee burned homes, fields lay abandoned, and the scars of displacement deepened. The challenge for Traoré was immense: how to convert the energy of revolution into lasting security. Politically, his government cut deep into the habits of privilege. Ministers stripped of perks grumbled in private. Some bureaucrats, accustomed to lavish allowances, resisted reforms. Yet in the eyes of the ordinary citizen, this cleansing was long overdue. The phrase "soldier of the people" carried weight precisely because Traoré lived it, rejecting titles, refusing luxury, standing shoulder to shoulder with the rank and file. For many, it was the first time they saw leadership that resembled sacrifice rather than indulgence. The economic front was perhaps the boldest gamble. By approving a state-run gold refinery and suspending export permits, Traoré struck at the very heart of neocolonial exploitation. For decades, raw gold had been siphoned out, enriching corporations abroad, while Burkina Faso remained impoverished. Now, the attempt to process gold domestically promised jobs, industrial growth, and a shift from dependency to self-reliance. But it also carried risks. Western investors pulled back, fearing nationalization. International banks grew cautious. For a fragile economy, such isolation could be dangerous. Yet Traoré pressed on, convinced that sovereignty was worth more than loans. The Ibrahim Traoré coup became more than a change of regime. It was a test of whether dignity could outweigh dependence. To some, It was a beacon for all Africa, a demonstration that the chains of history could be broken. To others, it was reckless, risking economic collapse and inviting retaliation. In the villages, opinions were mixed. Mothers whose sons joined the volunteer brigades felt both pride and fear. Farmers welcomed the talk of sovereignty, but worried about whether markets would survive without Western trade. Students admired Traoré's humility, yet questioned how long international patience would last. The nation breathed hope and uncertainty in the same breath. Beyond the borders, political ripples spread. Other leaders in the Sahel watched closely. If Traoré succeeded, their own citizens might demand the same courage. If he failed, it would serve as a warning. For Burkina Faso, this meant every step forward was also a step on a knife's edge. What cannot be denied is the shift in identity. Once seen as a backwater, dependent and weak, Burkina Faso now walked taller. Its name, once again, meant what Sankara had intended: the land of upright people. Pride returned to the vocabulary of its youth. Yet the question remained: was this transformation sustainable, or merely a momentary flame in the wind? Could sovereignty survive in the face of jihadist violence, Western pressure, and economic fragility? The world was no longer watching in silence. Reactions began to echo far beyond Ouagadougou. The ripples of Ibrahim Traoré's defiance did not stop at Burkina Faso's borders. They surged outward, shaking regional alliances, unsettling international institutions, and forcing global powers to confront a shifting reality in the Sahel. Across Africa, the reactions were divided. The African Union and ECOWAS expressed official concern, warning of the dangers of military takeovers. They urged a return to constitutional order, fearing that Traoré's rise might legitimize coups elsewhere. Yet beneath the formal statements, a quieter recognition emerged. He was not a typical putschist, seeking personal glory. His popularity among citizens, his echoes of Sankara's vision, and his rejection of luxury made him harder to dismiss. In Europe, unease was palpable. France, once the unchallenged master of West African politics, reeled from its expulsion. To be cast out so abruptly was not merely a diplomatic setback, but a symbolic humiliation. The European Union echoed concerns about democracy and human rights, but the underlying anxiety was economic. Contracts, mines, and trade routes that had been reliable for decades were suddenly slipping away. Washington's tone was cautious but clear. The United States emphasized the importance of counterterrorism, wary that Russian influence might fill the void left by France. American officials warned that security gains could be lost, yet offered little evidence that years of Western presence had improved the situation. To many observers, their words rang hollow. Meanwhile, other capitals welcomed the change. In Bamako and Niamey, the leaders of Mali and Niger clasped hands with Traoré, forming the Alliance of Sahel States, a pact built on mutual defense, shared resources, and a demand for sovereignty. It was not just an alliance of armies, but of identities, declaring that the Sahel would stand on its own feet. Moscow, too, seized the moment. Russia supplied weapons, advisors, and diplomatic support. The Kremlin portrayed itself as a partner willing to respect sovereignty where the West had only imposed conditions. Beijing followed with offers of infrastructure projects and mining deals, less ideological but equally strategic. For the first time in decades, Burkina Faso had alternatives beyond Paris and Washington. Analysts began to whisper a phrase that spread like wildfire: the Burkina Faso Revolution. For supporters, it symbolized the possibility of a multipolar Africa no longer tethered to one master. For critics, It threatened instability, isolation, and the loss of fragile democratic gains. But for the people of Ouagadougou, the revolution was not a theory. It was the sight of a captain walking among them, refusing to bow, daring to reimagine the future. But revolutions are judged not by the banners they raise, but by the futures they secure. The future of Burkina Faso now stands on a razor's edge. Every decision made in Ouagadougou under Ibrahim Traoré carries weight far beyond the nation's borders. For some, it is the dawn of a new era. For others, the beginning of a perilous gamble. On the hopeful horizon lies the possibility of sovereignty reborn. If the state-run gold refinery succeeds, it could anchor an economy long dependent on foreign contracts. If the volunteer brigades hold the line, villages once abandoned could again be safe. If the alliance of Sahel states deepens its cooperation, the region could form a shield against both terrorism and foreign exploitation. In this vision, Burkina Faso becomes not a pawn, but a pioneer. Proof that dignity can be defended even by a small, landlocked nation. Yet the risks are formidable. Terrorist networks are resilient, adapting to every new strategy. A single misstep could plunge the countryside back into chaos. Western powers, unwilling to lose influence, may tighten economic pressure or covertly undermine the government. Isolation from international finance could suffocate development before reforms take root. And within, the burden of expectation on a 30-something captain could strain the very movement he leads. The path forward is not one of certainty, but of courage. Traoré himself has framed it starkly: homeland or death. Such words inspire, but they also remind the nation that survival is not guaranteed. To walk this road is to embrace both pride and peril. Still, history shows that great changes are never born from comfort. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as fragile and dependent, now carries the gaze of an entire continent. Whether the future holds prosperity or struggle, one truth is undeniable: the spirit of resistance has been rekindled. And so the people ask themselves, will the sacrifices of today yield a harvest of dignity tomorrow? Or will the storms of history sweep this flame away? And so we return to the question: if one small landlocked nation can rise, what stops the rest? From the soil of Burkina Faso rises a story that echoes across Africa, a tale of chains and courage, of loss and renewal. For more than a century, this land was plundered, its people silenced, its leaders either complicit or cut down. Thomas Sankara once dared to break that cycle, only to be assassinated. Today, Ibrahim Traoré carries that torch, not as a general cloaked in medals, but as a captain who calls himself a soldier of the people. The struggle is not only against terrorism or poverty, but against an entire system that sought to define Africa as dependent and disposable. Traoré's defiance, from expelling foreign troops to reclaiming control over gold, has reopened a chapter many thought forever closed. It is more than politics. It is dignity restored. Yet the journey is far from complete. The threats are real: jihadist violence, economic isolation, covert attempts to destabilize his rule. The Ibrahim Traoré coup stands as both a beacon and a target. Twice in history, Burkina Faso has tried to free itself from neocolonial chains, once under Sankara and now again. Will this second attempt endure, or will it too be crushed? Across Africa, eyes are watching. In Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and beyond, young people see a leader who refuses to bow. They call it the Burkina Faso Revolution, not because the country is already free, but because it has chosen to fight for freedom rather than accept despair. The world must now ask, is this merely a momentary defiance, or the beginning of a continental awakening? Will the Ibrahim Traoré coup become a footnote in history, or the prologue of a new chapter for Africa? If you believe Africa deserves the chance to stand upright, then stay with us. Speak your thoughts in the comments, and share this voice so it cannot be silenced. The harvest of tomorrow begins with the seeds we plant today.